tonight we're going to talk a little bit about benchmarking, and tonight we're not actually going to work through worked examples. I'm just managing everyone's expectations. The whole point of this is to introduce you all to a free online resource that you can use to help get you started with benchmarking. And I'm going to work through some kind of questions, work through a bit of terminology as well. So really troubleshooting, we'll start off with troubleshooting. If you encounter any problems or viewing slides, leave the meeting and rejoin using the original meeting link. And then also, if you have any questions, please can you type them into the Q&A box. The temptation is always to try and type them into the chat, and it's quite difficult it's difficult to follow it and follow it properly. So so if you can type them into the Q&A box, please, and we'll pick them up from there. Just to be aware tonight, what we will do is we do send you a feedback form. We ask you for feedback on the webinar, and we really ask that you fill it out, and you fill it out honestly, and we have broad shoulders. We'll take criticism for improvement, etc., etc. And also, but to be aware that you will get in that feedback, you will get a PDF of the slides. And what I've done is I've embedded links to lots of different resources in the Farm Advisory Service website for you to be able to read and guide yourself through getting started with the tool. So really tonight is about just sit back, have a listen, and pop any questions that you may have into the Q&A box, and rest assured that you would be able to work through using this tool subsequent to this webinar. Okay. Now we'll just try and. So tonight we're aiming for about half an hour to 40 minutes with a bit of Q&A. We put in an hour, but it's a lovely evening. It's bank holiday, and I'm sure people have other things to do. So what are we going to do tonight? Our goal for the session is to introduce you to this free online resource for benchmarking. It's called the Whole Farm Benchmarks Tool, and it's been recently published on the Farm Advisory Service website, and it's currently the only Scottish resource using it's the only Scottish farm-based resource using real data from farms. So it gives a proper industry average for your particular farm type. We're going to do a little bit about signposting to guide you how to understand how to use it, and identification of various different resources to help you understand your farm accounts data. So how are we going to do this? We're going to cover a little bit about terminology. We're going to cover where you might find these numbers in your farm accounts. We're going to cover comparing your farm to others similar in size and type to your own, and then the right questions to ask yourself, or some right questions. No one person has all the answers based on what you find. So who are we talking to tonight? It's quite difficult to know. We're on Zoom. And so to you, are you new to running a farming business? Are you new to benchmarking? Are you new to understanding your farm accounts? Or are you indeed new to this benchmarking resource and you're just a little bit curious about what it is and how you might be able to use it in your business? I'm well aware that some of the concepts that I may talk about tonight are very familiar to some of you here on this call. The big question really in all of this is, why should we benchmark? Why benchmark our businesses? Well, it's been proven time and again that businesses that benchmark have better financial performance. And benchmarking doesn't have to be restricted to money. What we're going to look at tonight is a tool that takes a historical view of your business in order to help you make change for the future. Many businesses benchmark using ongoing productivity data, say, for example, within their suckler herd or their sheep flock, And that's another way of benchmarking. Benchmarking basically means taking some numbers that matter to you and your business and comparing them against others similar in size and similar to your own or to yourself. And we'll come back to that later on. So here's our first resource. It's just a short video. I'm not going to play it. It's a short video about a dairy farming business that actually engages in 3 different benchmarking activities. One, and in a discussion group with other farmers, other dairy farmers, and that's a closed group with lots of trust. And then other one with his industry customer. He supplies milk to Sainsbury's. And then he has another group that benchmarks for a particular technical bit of performance. And that's particularly relevant in dairy farming, where it's a highly technical approach is required. So in the pre-webinar promotional material, there was something about comparing your farm to others like you. And that's really important to help you get started. So this is the second resource I'm going to point you to, and something we're going to talk about in about 10 or 15 minutes, the Whole Farm Benchmarks tool. And this is a group average data set across 7 to 8 different farming types that are in the supported sectors, supported by Scottish Government payments. It's where does this information come from? It comes from the Scottish Farm Business Survey, which is a granular economic and environmental analysis of over 400 farms in Scotland across these different supported sectors. And that's really important. It means that the data that you're comparing yours to comes from real farms, and I've talked about that before. There is also on the website, on the FAS website, there is a handy guide, and it's called Improving Your Farming Finances in 30 Minutes. That's a little bit disingenuous, but actually sometimes just by getting started, you can be on the path to improving your farming finances in quite a short space of time. So that's another resource. And again, just to remind you, the PDF will be coming out with your evaluation form. So you will have all these links. You don't need to scribble them down just now. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of guidance around terminology. And this is really because I know we've invited a lot of new entrants onto this webinar tonight. I'm not sure how many of you have actually managed to get here. You may be busy out finishing off some jobs outside in the fine evening. But I think, again, this is about terminology can often be a barrier to people making progress with A, understanding their farm accounts, and B, getting started with benchmarking. And it shouldn't be this way, but it just is. So we have to address that. And I found some really good resources, again, on the FAS website. If this feels like a signposting session, then perhaps it is, but sometimes it's quite handy to put everything all in one place, and then you can actually rather than spending your time trundling around the FAS website looking for free resources, you can actually just lift them from this presentation. So this is a short course, Understanding Farm Accounts, and has actually become, it's a short course that guides you through the principles and practices, well, the principles of understanding your farm accounts. And if you're new to farming or new to benchmarking, and particularly new to farm accounts and new to running your own business, I would strongly recommend that you have a look around this. It's not the newest, but it doesn't really matter because the accounting terminology doesn't really change over time. But this is a really useful course, and it's one of those things that you can refer back to time and time again. It's also interactive. You set yourself some little goals and you do some quizzes, but it's a really useful resource just to keep your terminology correct. There is also a guide here. Again, it takes less than 10 minutes to read, really handy. Print it out, keep it on your desk when you're with your farm accounts, and you'll be able to quickly kind of nail the concepts that we're going to talk about. They're not complicated if you're experienced in handling your own farm accounts, But again, it's getting your head around the terminology is really important to make progress. I can't stress that enough. And it's really worthwhile spending a little bit of time on and going backwards and forwards over it and back with your latest set of farm accounts. And then you can begin to understand where your numbers match up to the concepts described in this film. So I did also say, where would we find some of these numbers in your farm accounts? Well, again, this is what this looks like. This is a picture of the profit and loss or the trading account statement. And it's a page that you will find in your farm accounts. And it's where all the kind of the juicy stuff is for you to be able to lift these numbers and to be able to use them with the whole farm benchmarks tool in order to be able to do some work yourself on your own benchmarking information, on your own accounts data, excuse me. And so sometimes it's called a profit and loss statement. People refer to it as a P&L. It's also known as the trading account, and it has terminology like output. Here they've used cost of sales. We're going to call that variable costs. They've used gross profit. We're going to call that gross margin, and I'll come to that in the next couple of slides. But this is the structure of this resource. Down the side, you have the various segments. It doesn't take long to work through the course, and it really does give you a very sort of high level, quite simple approach to a simple way of learning how to get your head around farm accounts and farm accounts information. So terminology, what are we going to talk about a bit later on in a few minutes? We're going to talk about output. It can sometimes be known as turnover. It can be found in the farm accounts as turnover. So output sounds obvious, includes the output from all your farm enterprises, your subsidies and diversifications that use farm resources. This is particularly pertinent to the tool that I'm going to show you. How is it calculated? For livestock and crops, it's your sales minus your purchases plus your closing stock minus your opening stocks. And it includes also all your other trading income. So your direct payments, your BPS, your way leaves, and your suppler beef calf scheme, should that be part of it. And again, it can sometimes be in your farm accounts presented as turnover. And further terminology we're going to talk about variable costs. These are costs that are variable. I know it sounds obvious, but there's no harm in kind of nailing it. And these change with the scale of your business. So if you have more cattle, you will need more feed. If you have more cropping land, you may need more fertilizer. These are the kind of variable costs. And then we're going to talk about farm gross margin. This is an often quoted term, and and it's sometimes identified as gross profit. So the two terms are interchangeable. Get used to that. Get comfortable using one. Be aware that there are other terminology to be used. And that is your farm output, as we talked about in the previous slide, minus the total of your variable costs. And that gives you your farm gross margin figure. We are working here on a whole farm basis, and I think it's important to understand that. We know that many of you have lots of different enterprises in your business, and with this tool, it works on a whole farm basis, and it actually segments the information according to the different farm types. So that's how we get round, with this resource, that's how we get round the fact that this is not enterprise based. It is a loss to the industry, the livestock industry really, that we don't have up-to-date QMS costings information that give enterprise costings, because we know that that's what people really want. They want to drill into their enterprises. However, if you're new to this whole process, it's important that you find an entry level and a way in that you feel comfortable with, that can give you some information and can help you get going. And that's actually really important, because as much about benchmarking, it's about building the habit. And I'll come to that a bit later on. Then we get into your fixed costs, sometimes known as your overheads, or identified on your farm accounts as your overheads. I'll just go back to that page here. We've got it in here, we've got it as overheads, and it's so it can, and these are the things that go in the fixed cost category: your paid labor, power and machinery, property, admin, depreciation, rent and overhead, rent and interest, and then other sundry overheads. Things really that do not change given the scale of your business. And all these things interact, so it's important to be aware of that. So then we come to the killer number, and the net profit. Revenue minus costs sounds completely obvious. In this series of calculations and the way it works down the pages in the tool that I'm going to show you, you end up with farm gross margin or gross profit minus your fixed costs. So that just lays out the terminology for you in order to be able to get started with benchmarking. So again, here we come back to the resource that I was going to show you. It's the Whole Farm Benchmarks tool, and then there's a guide there as well. And in this tool, confusingly or not, net profit is known as farm business income. Why is that? Because the Scottish Farm Business Survey, where this data comes from, produces this internationally recognized statistic of agricultural profitability. It's called farm business income. It's equivalent to net profit. And I think we describe it really clearly here as what is left to be available to the business before paying yourself as the business owner or manager. If you are paid within the business, that will come under a fixed cost as paid labor. But if you're in a partnership and this is what's left to pay yourself and for reinvesting in capital items, i.e. big pieces of either machinery or buildings that will help you do your job. So that's a fixed cost. So the first thing to establish here is what farm type are you? And I don't know whether we want to work to people being of a particular farm type. If people want to put something in the chat about what they think they are from these, are they mainly a sheep farm? Okay, right. Which one will we pick? I think we'll probably let's pick the cattle and sheep LFA, because that's got some interesting, a couple of interesting things in it about farm size and farm type, and also the concept of having quite a lot of rough grazing within your business. But this is how, when you go to use the tool, this is how you establish what farm type you are, if over 2/3 of your output comes from a particular enterprise. And the tool was published fairly recently, and it takes data up to the end of May 2023. It's very important to, as farmers and as progressive farmers and people who are interested in ensuring that their business does as well as it can, sometimes we seek perfection, and actually it can stop us sometimes from actually doing something. This may not be the case with everybody here, but it can happen that people go, oh, that's not bang up to date, therefore it's not relevant to my business. I think it's really important, if we can hold in our heads sometimes, that if we aren't benchmarking, that actually doing something to get started is probably more important than doing nothing at all. So if we can tolerate that mild imperfection in the data set, and the fact that it is historical, and that actually you may well be using your farm accounts data, your accounts that have come back from the accountant, that only took you up to October 2023, so or November 2023. So we have to sort of proceed as though we are aiming for progress, not perfection. So here we have a drop-down box. Well, there's various resources. There's the guide here, and you can download the full data set as a PDF should you wish to do so. Over here, there's a glossary. So that again is another way of checking in that you can check out all the terms and terminology. So here we are, farm business income measures the overall performance of the business. And so any terminology that you find within this tool, as you go around it, just click on the glossary button and you can go and find it. There's a little guidance video at the bottom here, should you wish to have a go. But I think the purpose of this webinar really is to get you going on it. So we're going to choose from the drop-down box our particular farming type, and we're going to choose mixed cattle and sheep LFA. This has 2022 on it. It's actually 2023. So that's just a little misnomer. There's a series of tabs. You land on the physical data page here. You can also export this as a CSV file. You can download it to Excel and you can get started with your farm accounts working on it on your own. You can export it as a PDF and you can print it out, and then you can get your pen and paper out and your calculator and you can work through it on your own. We often assume that we can't do things unless we have some technology in place. And actually, a pen and paper is technology if you use it right, and a calculator is technology if you kind of understand what you're doing. And I think that's really important. We can get bogged down in the trying to be perfect, and we can seek barriers where they don't need to exist. So here we land on the landing page. This tells us about, this gives us 4 columns here. So in the mixed cattle and sheep LFA, we've got 3 different farming types. And then we've got an upper 25%, a top performing 25% of farms whose farm business income is in the top 25%. And I'll come to that in just a moment. We then have 3 categories here. We have percentage of rough grazing, because how extensive your farm is will have a massive impact on your productivity and some of the metrics in this tool. So if under 25% of your land is rough grazing, use this column of figures here. Between 25 and 80%, this column here. And if you have quite an extensive LFA beef and sheep farm, this is your column of figures here. So this gives you some numbers, some average numbers that you're comparing to. Some of you may have farms that are much bigger than this. And that may mean that your comparisons are less valid. Completely understand that. I think it's important. There comes a time where size does matter, and I think that's important to keep into context. What's interesting about these figures is that the upper 25% of farms, the top performing percent of farms, don't necessarily have the largest number of cows or in the mix. When we scroll across the top of the tool, we go to the next tab, which is FBI, farm business income, pounds per farm. We actually get actual numbers here. So we get the amount of farm output here down the side. We talked about output earlier on, and we talked about, and so we get the actual numbers of averages. The actual average for these 14 farms, the output from cattle is just over 39,000, from sheep and wool is just over 50,000. Their total output is just around £170,000. These are not huge businesses. These are family farming businesses, and looking to deliver the goals for their particular family scenario. So you can work through, you can compare yourself using your farm accounts data. You get your profit and loss accounts page and your trading income page, and you can compare it in this box. Having said that, this one here, farm business income as a percentage of output, allows us to compare variable sizes, as in numbers of animals and numbers of hectares, across different farming scenarios. So it allows us to express the output or the turnover that we get from our cattle as a percentage of farm business income. It allows us to express our variable costs as a percentage of farm business income. And that allows for, if you can convert your input costs as a percentage of output, then you can make it's a much more useful measure to compare your business with farms similar in size and type to your own. So we have here that the top performing 25%, these 14 farms, on average, their total variable costs are 29% of their output, which leaves them with an average farm gross margin of 71%. And you can see across the board, across these other three groups of farms within this LFA beef and sheep category, we can see that that's significantly higher than these three across the way here. And so then the question becomes, why? What is it? It allows you to be able to see what is it in these different categories. How does my farm differ in these different categories compared to the top performing farm? And that's where the meaningful benchmarking comparison comes. You also have fixed costs here expressed as a percentage of output. Output is set at 100%, and your fixed costs here are 44% in the top performing farms. And then when you look across here, you can see that the fixed costs will vary from 49% right the way up to 63%. So where does your farm fit in this? What percentage of your output are you spending on paid labor? Are you spending 4% or are you spending 14%? You know, this is where and then you have to overlay context on top of that. So this is just the beginning of the guide around the tool. And so I don't want to spend overly long in here, and we can come back to it through the Q&A session. But it's really to show you a kind of, this page here is really useful for being able to compare, to being able to express your farm output percentages, but more meaningfully, your farm variable cost breakdowns from your farm accounts, and maybe even your fixed cost breakdowns from your farm accounts against farms that are similar in size and type to your own. And it could be these farms, or you could just go for the top 25% of performing farms. There are other tabs here, which some of you may find useful. There are prices per head for animals that have been, yes, sales and purchases. So these are sales up at the top. These are purchases down here. And you can see how your prices per animal compare. If that's something that you're interested in, it may not be so meaningful for your business. Then we have some yield and output data here, less relevant for LFA beef and sheep, because you probably don't have a lot of cropping. There's a few bits and pieces of cropping here, but not very much. And then we have a performance page for sheep. And again, I'm certain that some of you have much more detailed performance measures that you would be comparing your sheep numbers against for productivity purposes. But again, if you see this as a kind of entry level to benchmarking type of tool, then this can be quite a useful measure here, particularly the use to the tup can be quite useful just to see. And then you've got your lambs marked, disposed here as well. So these are some questions. I've put some questions in here for you to be able to take away when you get the presentation tomorrow. And it's like, do you have your most recent set of farm accounts to hand? And question one of the areas that people, before focusing on your costs, on your input costs, There's something about output. Do you have enough output? Have you had significant problems that have dropped off your output? Now, using the page that I showed you, that might be difficult to see, but this is something that you can look at the actual money page in the Whole Farm Benchmarks tool, or you can look at your output just from last year. Most farm accounts will have 2 years worth of information. And although that sounds really obvious, I'm aware that I may be talking to some people who aren't familiar with this process, and actually, comparing your output to last year and understanding why things may not be where they were. Your business could have undergone change, or you could have had something else going on that actually you may have had an animal health problem. And sometimes seeing these things writ large in numbers can actually, and having the conversation about why things are the way they are, is actually what the benefit of benchmarking can do for your business. So the next question here is net profit. What percentage is it of your output? Another question, is it what you need? Bearing in mind that net profit is what you have left to pay yourselves and what you have left to reinvest in your business. And if you're growing a business and you're new to farming, you will need to live on something, and also you will need to reinvest in your business. So is it what you need? Does it meet your goals? And then that's another whole conversation about goal setting. And then there's the other question, what is it that you need? You may think you may be able to not need very much, but you may need more than you think. And that comes down to the conversation, and sometimes within and between family members in the business, about what everyone is trying to get out of the business. And I'm not going to get into that too much. That's a huge area, all of its own, goal setting and understanding the different contexts for the different family members of the business. One of the key measures here as well is it greater than your support payments? That's really important. One should be aiming to, well, it needs to be, it should be, it could be, it should be, it would be good if it was greater than your support payments. It's not the end of the world if it isn't, because your business may be in a period of transition, but that should be a goal, that your net profit is greater than your support payments. And then the really tough question is, where is your business without support? If you take out that number from your output, what happens to your numbers then? And again, that's where using an Excel tool can help, because you can play around with various ideas about what happens if you take that out, and you can see where your business is. So this is just an example of output having an impact. It's a very quick and dirty example. It's a mixed cattle and sheep farm, 130 suckler cows selling most as stores. You're selling store cattle over the course of a year. Your average price has dropped by £80 a head, and your average weights are lower. That's odd. What's going on there? So you go back historically, you scrutinize your calving period, you realize you've had a lengthy calving period, you had an instinct it was there, you're not routinely doing livestock productivity recording, and you've ended up with a lower average weight of stores sold. And then you need to ask yourself why. That's the thing that prompts the conversation. You got a new bull, you had a spate of difficult calvings, and your cows were slow to get back in calf. So you had to lengthen the calving period. You may have known that you'd have done that, but sometimes seeing the financial impact of that can actually be the thing that really brings it home, that this is something that you need to watch and that you need to address within your business, and helps you to try and implement systems within your business so that you have methods for performance recording, so that you can understand fully the impact of these kinds of issues on your business, and that you can try to prevent them in future. And how do you have that conversation? Well, that's the time where, if you can't find the solution for yourself, maybe you need the help of a discussion group that you join. Maybe you come to various webinars that talk about livestock productivity or data to help you with herd management. that kind of thing. There's plenty of free resource out there through the Farm Advisory Service and other places. Most consultancy firms that help businesses will have a series of free resources about farm productivity. So get curious, get reading, and that can help you to kind of crystallize your thinking. If you get the opportunity to join a benchmarking group, join it, go for it. It can really drive impact in your business. Don't be afraid of asking what may seem like tricky questions, or questions because you don't understand terminology or how you do things. You'll very quickly pick it up, and it can actually, you'll very quickly begin to see the benefit of it. And from the farming side, I've been involved in benchmarking groups, and they always throw up really, really interesting questions for everyone within the group. You've got to trust people when you get into it, but they really are worth their weight in gold. So, okay, here's some questions around variable costs. What percentage are they of your output? We've covered some of this already. How does that compare with your group average? How does that compare with your previous year? How do they break down into the various components? Feed, concentrates, roughages. What were the other categories there? I can't remember off the top of my head. And how do your percentages match up with your farming group average? Are they about the same? Do they hit the top 25%? Are you doing quite well anyway? Hurrah, that's great. But the really killer question is, where does your business differ significantly? And then that prompts the conversation, what do you do next? There's plenty of help out there. And if you think back to that previous example, and I'm just talking about a quick example, you can read it there yourselves. You have the potential to spend a small amount of money on some outside help and support. And sometimes you have the potential to save quite a lot of money in your business. Maybe all of you are doing that already, but you can. And this is another example from a family farming business that employed staff and had a new stockman to help them because they had a lot of other things going on, and they scrutinized their input costs by enterprise on a quarterly basis. It was quite a task. And they suddenly noticed there was a huge surge in their feed costs compared to the previous year, and there'd been incorrect use of minerals. When they went and dug into it and got everyone around the table, all four of us or three of us or two of us or whoever it was, and they started to retrain. They retrained staff, and they found a saving of over £8,500. And actually this triggered the understanding within the business of the impact of correct staff training across all enterprises. And that can be particularly relevant in very detail specialist enterprises where detail is really important, detail around productivity and inputs. And I've asked you the question, would this happen to you? Maybe it wouldn't, but maybe it would. Who knows? So then we get on to the slightly knottier question. I've posed the same questions around fixed costs. Fixed costs is really challenging. There are the caveats. Often farmers are working alone and you have to be safe. And so you may need to invest in some piece of kit that helps you work alone safely. And that's absolutely the number one thing you have to take into account. However, there is no denying that it is a farming habit it can be a farming habit to like to reinvest rather than potentially to use the tax opportunities to reinvest. And that actually that maybe leads to quite a significant fixed cost overhead for the business, given the level of output, and that actually these things are all interlinked. You may need to power up your output in order to justify having that high level of fixed costs. Because when we looked at the example, they can be quite they can be quite high. So it's 8:45. I'm going to wrap up. Benchmarking. Some thoughts. Don't fixate on 1 year. Accounts are historical. They may have changed. Your farm is unique. Understand your own context. It's not an excuse for letting yourself off. You are your own best comparison. Use this tool to help you get started. And very quickly, you may well find yourself just comparing against yourself. And that's the best comparison. Aim for progress, not perfection. Build the habit. This is a habit. Good financial habits in a farming business, good use of data is a really useful habit to build. Top tips, focus on your output and your two biggest inputs. The best comparison is with yourself. I sound like a stuck record. Join discussion groups, ask questions. Just keep asking questions until you get the answer that you want. Use the tool to get started, develop the habit. It's not just about money, and I've put another link in here to somebody who is using livestock KPIs to drive profitability. And again, that's at the very beginning of that episode. I'm not going to show you tonight. And then here I have I've put all these resources into one place. I don't think there's any dairy farmers on the call tonight. However, there is a local dairy benchmarking meeting, a series of meetings kicking off on the 26th of June in the Stranraer office. If anyone is here from that area, spread the word, and it's called The Devil's in the Detail. And that I know will be a much more detailed, higher level benchmarking exercise. And I was chatting with the person who's going to be delivering this series of meetings, and she was talking about sending out data input sheets ahead of time. So that will be making the assumption that people are further down the road for benchmarking. So I think that's it tonight. What I'm going to do is I'll stop sharing. The last thing I will say is that we do have this FAS companion app, and you can roll over the QR codes there and download some handy tools. Nothing to do with benchmarking yet, but whatever tools and free resources you can use to help your business, they're all there. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm going to invite questions. If anyone has any questions, to pop them in the Q&A. Can you enter your own figures into the benchmarking tool or download into Excel? What I would do is I would download the Excel tool, and then you can cross-check, or you can upload the Excel tool download into your own figures if you have them in Excel, and then you can manipulate them from there. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I have another question. What is an acceptable percentage profit? That's a really, really good question. Obviously, we all want to make as much profit as possible in our farming businesses, but there are boundaries within what is possible, and one can only work so hard. I think that's actually a really an important thing to think about. One can only work as hard. You can't work all the time. So if I go back to the beef and mixed cattle and sheep, what did our top performing farm, top 14 performing, 25% of high performers, they made a farm business income of 27% of their output. So that's 27% net profit. That sounds pretty good to me. And you can go and look at farm business income for the top 25%, and that can be a goal in any of these farming categories. When I look at the specialist beef farm, what does it come out at? It comes out at 28%. Okay. Right, I think I won't keep people any longer than they need to be. It's 9 minutes to 9. I'm giving you 9 minutes back of your time. And what I will say is this PDF will come out with your feedback form. We really value your feedback, and we really love to hear from you. Good, bad, and indifferent feedback. It's all matters and is all helpful. I'm going to close down the webinar tonight, and unless there's any more questions. And thank you very much for attending. I hope you've gained something from this. If you have any further questions, please feel free to call the advice line. Again, that information will come out within the PDF that you will receive. You get half an hour of free advice, and that could help you unblock a blockage if you're working on this, or it could help you find half an hour of specialist advice about which way to go next. There's plenty of grant funding available through the ILMP system to be able to do a business efficiency, to get grants for specialized business efficiency grants, which would be related to this kind of thinking about building good financial habits in your business. Okay, thanks very much. We'll see you again, folks.